Welcome to the Exposure Magazine podcast from the heart of the British nuclear test survivor community.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, and today we're bringing you something rather special, a story about sunshine, resilience, and the power of simply showing up. For 2 consecutive years, Britain's atomic veterans had gathered for their annual Day of Remembrance, only to be forced indoors by the relentless British weather. But this year, a remarkable change occurred. The veterans, with their unyielding resilience, decided to confront the elements head-on. This is the story of National Atomic Veterans Awareness Day 2025. Picture this. It's Wednesday, October 1st, the chosen date for the National Atomic Veterans Awareness Day. The National Memorial Arboretum in Ulruas, Staffordshire, a place specifically designed to hold memory, was the perfect setting for this significant event. It's quiet there, in that particular way that memorial spaces are quiet, not silent, but somehow set apart from the everyday rush of the world. The outdoor setting added a unique connection to the event, engaging everyone present in the shared history. Veterans and their families are gathering, some travelling hundreds of miles, to stand together at a memorial dedicated to a history that's often been overlooked, sometimes deliberately forgotten. These are the men, and in some cases their descendants, who were present at Britain's nuclear testing programme. Tests were conducted in Australia and the Pacific Ocean between 1952 and 1967. These tests, wrapped in secrecy and necessity, were part of Britain's post-war recalibration of its place in the world, and the veterans present were witnesses to the forces that humanity had only recently learned to unleash. For many of these veterans, their service during the nuclear tests has been a double burden. First, there was the exposure itself, standing witness to forces that humanity had only recently learned to unleash. And second, there has been the long struggle for recognition, acknowledgement, and a proper accounting of what that exposure might have meant for their health and their families. That's what makes this annual gathering so vital. It's more than just a traditional memorial service. It's a pilgrimage. It's a reunion. It's a public declaration that what happened decades ago in places most Britons will never visit matters. It matters now, and it will continue to matter. After 2 consecutive years of services held inside the Millennium Chapel, perfectly respectable, certainly dry, but not quite the same, the organisers made a decision. They'd take a risk. They'd hold the entire service outdoors, directly in front of the memorial itself. Now, if you've organised any outdoor event in Britain, you'll know this is not a decision made lightly. October, weather is unreliable. The smart money is always on having a backup plan, preferably one with a roof. But sometimes you have to take the gamble. And you know what? The gamble paid off, handsomely. Warm temperatures, bright sunshine, that crisp, golden quality of light you only get in early autumn, when the air has a certain clarity to it and everything seems to glow. After years of wrestling with British weather, after 2 consecutive years of retreating indoors, it felt less like luck and more like a blessing. The ability to gather in the open air directly before that stone monument lent everything an added layer of significance. There's something about standing in the elements under an open sky that changes the character of remembrance. Inside a chapel, no matter how beautiful, there's a certain containment. Outside, your words go up into the air, carried on the breeze. Your silence is filled with the sounds of leaves and birdsong. You're not isolated from the world. You're standing in it, claiming your space in it, insisting that this history belongs not in a closed room, but out in the open, under the same sun that shone on those distant testing grounds all those decades ago. This wasn't just convenient, it was right. Now, of course, no British gathering would be complete without at least one thing going slightly wrong. It's almost traditional, isn't it? The sort of minor disaster that becomes, in retrospect, the story everyone tells afterwards. The thing that proves we were truly there, truly together, truly making it work despite the odds. And true to form, just as the community was assembling before the 11:30 service, the PA system decided to stage its own little protest, complete power failure. One moment, everything's ready to go. The next moment, nothing. No microphone, no amplification, just a crowd of people and a rather urgent need for someone, somewhere, to hear what's about to be said. You can imagine the moment, can't you? That particular kind of British awkwardness, a mix of stoicism, humour, and a refusal to make a fuss, was settling over the crowd like a fog. The organisers are presumably having quiet panic attacks behind their composed faces, veterans glancing at each other, probably with that particular brand of gallows humour that comes from having seen somewhat worse things than a failed PA system. Everyone is wondering whether to wait, to chat, to pretend nothing's happening, or to simply carry on regardless. There's always a question like this at moments like these, isn't there? Do you push ahead? Do you delay? Do you acknowledge the problem or ignore it? It's the sort of small crisis that can define an event, for better or worse. But here's where something rather beautiful occurred. Antonio Socci, the bugler, stepped forward, and instead of awkward silence, instead of frantic, whispered consultations, instead of that terrible British anxiety about things not going according to plan, the crowd was treated to an impromptu concert, a small repertoire of tunes from the 1940s echoing across the Arboretum. It was a moment of unity, of everyone coming together to make the best of a challenging situation. Think about that for a moment. Someone with a skill, stepping into a gap, filling a need without being asked, without making a fuss. Just doing what needed to be done. The melodies drifting across the memorial grounds, tunes that many in the crowd would have known from their youth or their parents' youth. Music that spoke to a particular moment in British history, when the country was finding its feet after the most devastating war in human history. A technical failure transformed into a moment of pure, unscripted community spirit. No fuss, no drama, just someone with a skill and the willingness to use it. Making do, getting on with it. That particularly British form of resilience that doesn't announce itself, but simply is. It was perfect, really. A quiet demonstration that this community, forged in far more difficult circumstances than a failed PA system, tested in ways most of us will never fully understand, wasn't about to let something so small dampen the day. There's a kind of poetry in it, isn't there? The bugler, whose role in the formal ceremony would be to sound the last post and the réveillé, those ancient military calls that bookend the silence of remembrance, now also provides the soundtrack to an unexpected delay, continuity in the face of disruption. Grace under pressure, even the very minor pressure of a technical hitch. By the time the PA system was coaxed back to life, the mood had been set. This wasn't going to be a day defeated by minor obstacles. This was going to be a day that embodied the very spirit it was meant to honor: perseverance, adaptability, and the quiet determination to see things through. With the technical gremlins sorted, the informal moments of reunion gave way to something more profound: the formal service. The reason everyone had travelled so far, the purpose that had drawn them together under that clear October sky. At the heart of any memorial service is the Act of Remembrance, that formal ritual that transforms individual grief into something collective, something shared, something that ensures history isn't just passively recalled but actively preserved. It's the moment when private memory becomes public promise, when the scattered experiences of individual lives are woven together into a shared narrative that says, this happened, these people mattered, and we will not forget. There's tremendous power in ritual, isn't there? In saying the exact words, in the same order, year after year. It might seem repetitive to an outsider, but that's the point. Repetition is how we etch things into collective memory. Repetition is how we ensure that when the last person who was there is gone, the memory doesn't die with them. It lives on in the words we've learned to say, in the ceremonies we've learned to perform, in the promises we've learned to keep. The very Reverend Nicholas Frayling, chaplain to the British nuclear survivor community, opened with prayer. His words carried across the assembled crowd, setting the tone for what was to come, solemn but not mournful, respectful but not distant, honouring the past while standing firmly in the present. Alan Owen of Laubratz read a passage from the Bible, and then came the solemn heart of the ceremony. The chaplain's words rang out across the Arboretum, clear in the autumn air. We solemnly remember before God all those, both military and civilian, who have died as a consequence of British nuclear tests in Australia and the Pacific. That phrase, as a consequence of, it's carefully chosen, isn't it? It acknowledges a connection without requiring proof of causation, recognizing that these deaths are linked to that service, and that those moments in the desert and on those Pacific islands cast long shadows across the decades of life that followed. For many in this community, that phrase represents years of struggle, years of arguing for recognition, and years of trying to establish what seems obvious to them but has often been disputed by officials. That their service had profound costs, extending far beyond the moment of the tests themselves. Then, those familiar, powerful lines from Lawrence Binyon, written originally for the fallen of the First World War, but now woven into the fabric of British remembrance, spoken at memorials across the country and around the world. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. And the assembly responded as one, we will remember them. The simplicity of that exchange is profound, a statement, a promise, a response, an affirmation. The chaplain speaks for the dead, giving voice to those who can no longer speak. The assembly speaks for the living and for the future, promising that the dead will not be forgotten. That their sacrifice, however we define that word, however we measure its cost, will be held in memory. The last post followed, Antonio's bugle notes carried across the memorial grounds. If you've heard it, you know the effect. Those long, mournful notes seem to pull something out of the air itself, a sadness and a dignity that needs no words. It's been used for military funerals since the mid-19th century, but its power hasn't diminished. If anything, it's accumulated meaning, layer upon layer, every conflict, every loss, every ceremony adding to its weight. Then, that profound, respectful silence. 2 minutes traditionally, though time seems to behave differently in such moments. It stretches, it deepens. The kind of silence that somehow feels fuller than sound, pregnant with everything that isn't being said, heavy with memory and loss and hope and determination. In that silence, each person is alone with their thoughts. A veteran might be remembering comrades who didn't make it this far, who succumbed years ago to illnesses they believe were connected to their service. A family member might be thinking of a father or grandfather, trying to understand what their service meant, what they experienced, what they carried home with them. An organizer might simply be grateful that it all came together, that the weather held, that people came, that this small act of remembrance continues. And then, breaking that silence, the réveil. The counterpoint to the last post, the morning call, the return to life. Those bright rising notes that say, we remember the dead, we honor them, and we continue. We carry on. Life persists. The story isn't over. Wreaths were laid. One on behalf of Labrats International, another by Ian Hall, chairman of the NCCF, on behalf of both the BNTVA Museum and the NCCF, an organisation that has worked tirelessly to support this community and provide practical assistance. Simple gestures, these wreath layings, but weighted with meaning. Physical symbols of remembrance were placed at the foot of the stone memorial, where they'd remain long after everyone had gone home. Flowers that would fade certainly, but their placement documented, remembered, part of the record that says, on this day, in this year, people came together to remember. There's something deeply human about the laying of wreaths, isn't there? We've been bringing flowers to honour the dead since time immemorial. It's one of those practices that transcends culture and era. This need to leave something beautiful, something alive, in places of death and memory, as if beauty itself were a form of resistance against forgetting, against the cold finality of loss. A concluding prayer, a blessing. And with that, the formal ceremony drew to a close, leaving those symbols of remembrance resting at the foot of the stone under the autumn sun. But here's the thing about this day that strikes me most powerfully, the thing I keep coming back to as I think about what happened there in Alrewas on that October Wednesday. This wasn't just about solemnity, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't just about grief, though that was present and honoured. This was about something more fundamental, something that perhaps we don't discuss enough when we talk about remembrance, memory, and the preservation of history. This was about community, about the bonds that form between people who share an experience that most others can't fully understand, about the comfort of being among people who don't need things explained, who carry similar burdens, who understand in their bones what this all means. It was about resilience in the face of minor setbacks, whether that's rain or rogue PA systems or the simple passage of time. that makes these gatherings harder each year as veterans age and travel becomes more difficult. The fact that they keep coming, that they keep gathering, is itself an act of resistance against forgetting, against irrelevance, against the temptation to simply let the past be past. And it was about the simple, powerful act of showing up for one another. In a world that often moves on quickly from history, that's impatient with old stories and old wounds, these people come together year after year to say, "Not us. We're not moving on. We're staying with this. We're keeping this alive." The warm sunshine felt like a blessing, certainly. After 2 years of rain, after 2 years of being driven indoors, that clear sky and warm air seemed like nature itself was finally cooperating, finally acknowledging the importance of what was happening. But the genuine warmth? That came from the handshakes, the embraces, the faces that light up with recognition after a year apart. "Good to see you, mate. How are you keeping? Still here, then?" The shared stories told and retold, each telling adding a small detail, smoothing a rough edge, fixing the memory more firmly in place. The collective promise, spoken aloud in that act of remembrance to remember. These gatherings, they're not static monuments to the past. They're not fossils, preserved in amber, unchanging. They're living, breathing events. They evolve, they adapt, they respond to circumstances, like Antonio stepping forward with his bugle when the PA system failed. They incorporate new faces as children and grandchildren come to understand their family histories and choose to be part of this community. They acknowledge losses as each year brings news of veterans who've passed, chairs that will remain empty, and voices that will be missed. They're the thread connecting decades of history to this present moment, ensuring that a community's legacy is carried forward, not just in archives or official records, but in the hearts of those who continue to gather, to share, to remember. And as this community ages, as living memory inevitably fades and the men who are actually there become fewer each year, these annual pilgrimages become increasingly vital. They're strategic acts of preservation, yes, but also acts of defiance. They're declarations that these sacrifices, made in far corners of the world decades ago, will not be forgotten here at home. That the British nuclear veterans are not a footnote in history, but a chapter that deserves to be read, to be understood, to be honoured. There's an urgency to it now that perhaps wasn't there 20 years ago. Time is not on the side of memory. The youngest of the veterans who served at the British nuclear tests are in their late 80s now. In another decade, in another 20 years, there may be no one left who was actually there. The memory will have to be carried by others, by families, by historians, by people who care enough to keep showing up, to keep telling the story, to keep making the pilgrimage to Al Rewas every October. That's why days like this matter so profoundly. They're not just about looking backwards. They're about ensuring there's someone to look backwards from the future, that the chain of memory remains unbroken, that when the last veteran is gone, the story doesn't die with them. The 2025 National Atomic Veterans Awareness Day was blessed with sunshine. The weather, after 2 years of being unhelpful, finally cooperated. That's lovely, and I'm sure everyone was grateful for it. But perhaps more importantly, it was blessed with something that no weather can provide, something that can't be ordered up or guaranteed. The steadfast commitment of a community determined to remember. The willingness of people to travel long distances, to take time out of their lives to stand together and say, "This matters. You matter. What happened matters. We will not forget." In that determination, in that simple act of showing up year after year, there's something profoundly hopeful. It's an act of faith, really. Faith that remembrance matters, that issues of history, that the individuals who make up history matter. Faith that by gathering together, by speaking the words, by laying the wreaths, by sounding the bugle, we're doing something important. We're keeping something alive that deserves to be kept alive. And on a perfect October day, under a clear sky that seemed to be smiling on the proceedings, that faith felt justified. The community gathered. The words were spoken. The promise was made. We will remember them. And they will. Next year and the year after. And for as many years as it takes to ensure that this history, uncomfortable and complex as it may be, remains part of Britain's story. Not buried, not forgotten, not explained away. Remembered, honoured, held. That's all for this episode of Exposure Magazine. You can scan the QR code to access the BNTVA Museum's Wall of Remembrance. If you'd like to read more about the nuclear survivor community and the issues that matter to them, visit us at exposure.press. Until next time, remember them.
Thank you for joining us today as we bring Exposure Magazine to life. Like, subscribe and share for more great podcasts.